I was scrolling through Facebook on a Tuesday morning coffee, getting cold in my favorite ceramic mug, when I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There it was, bright and cheerful in my news feed, like a slap across the face. My sister Chloe had posted engagement photos with the caption, "3 weeks until I become Mrs. Anderson. Can't wait to celebrate with all our loved ones." The comment section exploded with congratulations from relatives, family friends, and people I recognized from our childhood neighborhood. My hands started shaking as I read through name after name of people who apparently knew about this wedding that I had never heard a single word about. My car practically drove itself to the house where I grew up in suburban Phoenix, that same 2-story beige stucco home with the red tile roof and the struggling palm trees in the front yard. I pulled into the circular driveway behind my mother's silver Honda Accord, noting how the desert landscaping looked more neglected than usual. The October heat hit me like a wall when I stepped out, that dry Arizona warmth that used to comfort me, but now felt suffocating. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, somehow feeling like I needed permission to enter the space where I once belonged. When my mother Patricia opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to something resembling guilt before settling into defensive resignation. She was wearing one of her flowered house dresses, her graying brown hair pulled back in the same ponytail style she had worn for the past 15 years. "Ruby," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, pushing past her into the familiar entryway with its terracotta tiles and southwestern art. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something else, something floral and expensive. As I walked into the living room, I understood why. The entire space had been transformed into wedding planning headquarters. Fabric swatches in blush pink and sage green covered the coffee table. Sample wedding invitations were spread across the dining room table like playing cards. A 3-ring binder labeled "Chloe's Big Day" sat open to a page of venue photographs, all gorgeous outdoor locations in Sedona with red rock backdrops and desert sunset lighting. "This looks like quite the small, intimate affair," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm as I picked up a guest list from the counter. My eyes scanned down the names, finding distant cousins from Colorado, family friends I hadn't seen in years, even my mother's book club members who barely knew Chloe. Patricia crossed her arms defensively, her face taking on that familiar, stubborn expression I remembered from childhood arguments. Chloe wanted to keep things simple and stress-free. After everything that happened with your divorce, she felt it would be better to have a peaceful celebration without any potential drama. The words hit me like physical blows. My divorce had been messy, yes, but only because I had finally found the courage to leave a man who had been cheating on me for 2 years with his dental hygienist. When I exposed Marcus's affair last Thanksgiving in front of the entire family, including his parents who were visiting, my mother had been mortified by what she called my inappropriate outburst and airing dirty laundry. "So I'm being punished for standing up for myself?" I asked, feeling tears burning behind my eyes, for refusing to pretend everything was fine while my husband made a fool of me. "You embarrassed all of us," Patricia said firmly. "The way you screamed at Marcus in front of everyone, throwing his phone across the room when you showed everyone those text messages." Chloe was humiliated. She said she never wanted to experience that kind of scene at her own wedding. I walked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, needing to escape the overwhelming evidence of celebration I wasn't invited to join. But when I reached what used to be my childhood bedroom, I stopped short. The space had been completely transformed into a gift wrapping station. Rolls of white and gold wrapping paper stood in the corner like sentries. Ribbons in wedding colors hung from hooks on the wall. Boxes of wedding favors covered my old desk. My twin bed was gone. My bookshelf had been replaced with shelves holding wedding presents. Even my high school graduation photo had been removed from the wall. That's when I saw it. Sticking out of the small trash can beside the desk was a corner of familiar purple leather. My old diary, the one I had kept from ages 12 to 18, filled with teenage dreams and secrets, and most importantly, dozens of entries about how I couldn't wait to be Chloe's maid of honor someday. How I had already planned the perfect bachelorette party for her and practiced speeches in my mirror. I pulled the diary from the trash, its pages slightly crumpled but still readable. As I flipped through the entries, I felt something break inside my chest. Page after page of my younger self writing about sister adventures and planning Chloe's future wedding like it was my own special responsibility. "You threw this away," I said, holding up the diary when Patricia appeared in the doorway. Her face flushed red, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I was cleaning out old things. It's time to move forward, Ruby. Chloe is starting her new life, and she needs to surround herself with positive energy and supportive people." The implication was crystal clear. I was neither positive nor supportive in their eyes. I was the family problem, the source of drama, the person who needed to be managed and excluded to protect everyone else's happiness. The next morning, I stationed myself outside Chloe's workplace, a trendy marketing firm called Creative Spark Solutions in downtown Phoenix. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. I had brought a peace offering, a manila envelope containing childhood photos of the two of us, and a 3-page handwritten letter where I poured out my heart about how sorry I was for any embarrassment I had caused and how much I wanted to be part of her special day. I waited in my car for nearly an hour, watching professionals in business casual attire stream in and out of the building's revolving glass doors. When I finally spotted Chloe's distinctive auburn hair and confident stride, my heart started racing with a mixture of hope and desperation. She was wearing a navy blue blazer and matching skirt, looking every inch the successful young professional she had become. At 25, Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who made good choices and kept her life drama-free. She had graduated from Arizona State University with honors, landed her dream job immediately, and now was marrying her college sweetheart in what would undoubtedly be the perfect wedding. "Chloe," I called out, jogging across the street to intercept her before she reached the building entrance. She turned, and for a split second, I saw something that might have been warmth in her green eyes. Then it was replaced by a cold wariness that made my stomach drop. "Or Ruby," she said, her voice professionally polite, in the way you might greet an unwelcome client. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you," I said, holding out the envelope. "About the wedding, about us. I brought some pictures from when we were kids and I wrote you a letter explaining everything." Chloe glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with having this conversation in public where her colleagues might witness family drama. She gestured toward a small park across the street with concrete benches shaded by mesquite trees. We sat down facing each other and I handed her the envelope with trembling fingers. She opened it carefully, pulling out the photos first. There we were at ages 8 and 6, dressed as matching princesses for Halloween. Another photo showed us building a blanket fort in the living room, grinning at the camera with identical gap-toothed smiles. The last picture captured us at Chloe's high school graduation, my arm around her shoulders as I beamed with pride for my accomplished little sister. But when she looked at the photos, her expression remained cold and distant. "These are nice memories," she said, finally, her tone suggesting they meant nothing to her now. "But they don't change anything, Ruby. You've become toxic to this family. Every holiday, every gathering, you bring drama and conflict. First, it was complaining about Marcus. Then it was the awful scene at Thanksgiving. And now you're demanding to be included in my wedding after everything that's happened." I felt like she had punched me in the stomach. Toxic Chloe. I was in an abusive marriage. Marcus was cheating on me and lying to everyone about it. I was drowning, and instead of supporting me, the family acted like I was the problem for not suffering in silence. You could have handled it privately, she replied, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. You could have gotten divorced quietly without humiliating everyone involved. Instead, you chose to make it everyone else's problem. My therapist says that sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they're family members. The mention of her therapist stung. I wondered what version of events Chloe had shared in those sessions, how I had been portrayed in her narrative of family dysfunction. So your therapist told you to exclude me from your wedding? I asked. She helped me understand that I have the right to protect my special day from people who might sabotage it, Chloe said. And honestly, Ruby, given your track record, can you blame me for being worried? That's when I noticed her engagement ring for the first time. The breath left my lungs in a rush as I recognized the distinctive Art Deco setting with its center diamond surrounded by small emeralds. It was our grandmother's ring, the one that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in our family. That's Grandma Helen's ring, I whispered, staring at the familiar piece of jewelry that I had been promised since childhood as the eldest granddaughter. Chloe's hand instinctively moved to cover the ring, a defensive gesture that told me everything I needed to know. Mom thought it would be appropriate for me to have it, she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Since I'm the one getting married, I was supposed to inherit that ring, I said, feeling tears burning behind my eyes. Grandma Helen specifically told me it would be mine someday. She used to let me try it on when I was little and tell me stories about how it would bring me luck and love. Well, maybe if your marriage had worked out, you would have gotten to keep it, Chloe replied cruelly. But since you're divorced now, it makes more sense for me to have it. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Not only was I being excluded from her wedding, but I was also being stripped of family heirlooms and memories that had been promised to me my entire life. I stood up abruptly, leaving the photos and letters scattered on the bench between us. I hope your wedding is everything you dreamed it would be, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. And I hope that ring brings you better luck than our family has brought me. As I walked away, I heard her call my name once, but I didn't turn around. I was done begging for acceptance from people who had already decided I didn't belong. The next few days passed in a haze of obsessive social media stalking that I knew was unhealthy but couldn't seem to stop. Every few hours, I found myself refreshing Instagram, Facebook, and even checking Snapchat stories from family members I barely spoke to, desperate for any glimpse into the wedding preparations that were happening without me. My cousin Jessica, who lived in Denver and visited Arizona maybe twice a year, had become the unofficial wedding photographer based on her constant stream of behind-the-scenes content. Her Instagram stories showed dress shopping expeditions to boutiques in Scottsdale with Chloe twirling in front of 3-way mirrors, while our mother and aunts offered opinions from velvet chairs. I watched through my phone screen as they visited cake shops, sampled flavors, and debated between vanilla buttercream and chocolate ganache. There was my Aunt Karen, who had always sent me birthday cards and Christmas gifts, now offering enthusiastic opinions about fondant decorations like I had never existed. The bachelorette party planning was documented in excruciating detail. Jessica posted photos of spa day reservations at a luxury resort in Sedona, wine tasting appointments at local vineyards, and dinner reservations at the most expensive restaurant in town. The guest list for the bachelorette party included college friends I had never met, work colleagues Chloe had known for 2 years, and even some of her high school classmates who had barely stayed in touch. But what hurt most was seeing family members I had grown up with, people who had attended my own wedding 5 years earlier and sent sympathy cards when my marriage fell apart, now celebrating Chloe's happiness as if I were a stranger. My cousin David from California posted a video of himself shopping for a wedding gift, asking his followers to help him choose between kitchen appliances. Uncle Ted shared a Facebook memory about Chloe's high school graduation, adding commentary about how proud he was to watch her continue making smart choices and surrounding herself with good people. The passive-aggressive nature of these posts wasn't lost on me. Every comment about Chloe's wisdom and good judgment felt like a direct criticism of my life choices. But the post that truly broke something inside me came from my mother's best friend Sandra, who had been like a second mother to me growing up. She shared a photo of herself addressing wedding invitations in her beautiful calligraphy with a caption that read, "So grateful to be part of this joyful celebration." Some families are blessed with children who make wise choices and avoid unnecessary drama. Chloe is such a gift to everyone who knows her. I stared at that post for nearly 10 minutes, reading and rereading the words that felt designed to cut me down. Sandra had been there for my high school graduation, my wedding, and had even sent flowers when I moved into my own apartment after the divorce. Now she was publicly praising my sister for being everything I apparently wasn't. The comments on Sandra's post made everything worse. Family, friends, and relatives chimed in with agreements about Chloe's wonderful character and how lucky the family was to have her. Some even made veiled references to other family situations that were more complicated and stressful for everyone involved. I screenshotted the most hurtful comments, torturing myself by reading them over and over. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street wrote, "Some children bring peace to their families and some bring chaos. Thank goodness Chloe inherited the peaceful genes." Our family dentist, Dr. Patterson, commented, "I've watched both girls grow up, and it's clear that Chloe has always been the level-headed one. Her parents should be so proud." Even my high school English teacher, Mrs. Thompson, who had encouraged my writing and told me I had talent, liked Sandra's post about Chloe's superior character. I felt like I was watching my entire support system, my whole identity as a member of this family, being systematically erased and rewritten with Chloe as the hero and me as the cautionary tale. But the discovery that nearly sent me over the edge came when I was deep diving through a local wedding vendor's Instagram account. I had been looking at photos from other Sedona weddings, torturing myself with images of the venue where Chloe's ceremony would take place, when I found something that made my hands shake with rage. Hidden in the comments of a post about difficult family dynamics at weddings was a response from the florist handling Chloe's arrangements. She had written, "We actually had a situation recently where a mother specifically requested that we refuse service to an estranged family member if she tried to insert herself into the wedding planning. It's sad when families have to take legal precautions to protect special occasions from toxic individuals." The timestamp on the comment coincided perfectly with Chloe's wedding planning timeline. There was no doubt they were talking about me. My own mother had not only excluded me from the wedding, but had actively worked to ensure I couldn't even attempt to participate in any aspect of the celebration. She had poisoned vendor relationships against me, painting me as someone so dangerous and unstable that businesses needed to be warned about my potential interference. I felt humiliated and betrayed in ways I hadn't known were possible. It was one thing to be excluded from a family event, but it was another level of cruelty to be treated like a threat that required professional intervention to manage. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, had been encouraging me for weeks to write a letter expressing my feelings about the family situation without actually sending it. She believed that putting my emotions into words would help me process the hurt and betrayal I was experiencing without creating more conflict. I spent 3 days crafting that letter, pouring my heart onto paper in a way I hadn't done since I was a teenager, keeping that diary my mother had thrown away. I wrote about the pain of being excluded, the confusion over how standing up for myself in an abusive marriage had somehow made me the villain in the family story. I described the humiliation of discovering vendor warnings and social media commentary that portrayed me as toxic and unstable. The letter was 12 pages long, filled with specific examples of how I had been systematically erased from family narratives and replaced with a version of myself that I didn't recognize. I wrote about missing our grandmother's last Christmas because the family had decided my presence would be too stressful for her, even though she had specifically asked for me. I detailed the ways my own wedding photos had been removed from family albums and how my achievements were no longer mentioned in holiday newsletters. Most importantly, I tried to explain that my so-called dramatic behavior was actually me finally finding my voice after years of being taught to accept mistreatment quietly. I had been the family peacekeeper for so long, smoothing over conflicts and absorbing emotional abuse to protect everyone else's comfort, that when I finally stood up for myself, it looked like rebellion and chaos to people who were used to my silence. The letter felt like a masterpiece of emotional honesty when I finished it. For the first time in months, I felt like I had articulated my experience in a way that might help my family understand my perspective. But late Thursday night, in a moment of wine-influenced poor judgment, I accidentally sent the entire letter to the family group chat instead of saving it to my drafts folder. I realized my mistake immediately when my phone started buzzing with notifications. First came the delivered confirmations, then the read receipts, then the typing indicators as family members began formulating their responses. The first reply came from my cousin Jessica. "Ruby, this is really inappropriate. Chloe doesn't need this kind of stress 3 weeks before her wedding." Uncle Ted followed with, "This kind of emotional manipulation is exactly why you're having these problems. No one wants to deal with this level of drama." My Aunt Karen, who had always been the family diplomat, tried to be gentler. "Honey, I understand you're hurt, but attacking the family when Chloe is trying to plan her special day isn't helping your case." But the message that destroyed me came from my mother. "This letter proves exactly why you can't be trusted at important family events. You've made Chloe's wedding about your own victim complex instead of celebrating her happiness. Until you can learn to be supportive instead of selfish, you're not welcome at family gatherings." Within 2 hours, I had been removed from the family group chat entirely. By the next morning, I discovered that several relatives had blocked me on social media platforms. Uncle Ted posted a Facebook status about protecting family peace from toxic individuals who refuse to take responsibility for their own choices. The most devastating blow came in the form of a certified letter that arrived at my apartment on Saturday morning. It was from a law firm representing my mother and sister, formally demanding that I cease all contact with family members and warning that any attempt to attend or disrupt Chloe's wedding would result in a restraining order. The letter was written in cold legal language that transformed my family relationships into potential criminal matters. It accused me of harassment through unwanted communication and threats to disrupt a private celebration. It specified that I was not to contact any family members, directly appear at any wedding-related events, or attempt to engage vendors or venues associated with the celebration. I sat on my couch holding that letter for nearly an hour, reading it over and over until the words started to blur together. My own family had hired attorneys to legally threaten me for expressing my emotions in what I thought was a private conversation. The woman who had changed Chloe's diapers and taught her to ride a bike was now considered enough of a threat to require legal intervention. The sister I had protected from bullies and helped with homework was now seeking court protection from my presence at her wedding. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality where expressing hurt feelings was equivalent to criminal behavior, and where asking for inclusion was treated as an act of aggression. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I was going to stop begging for acceptance from people who had clearly decided I was unworthy of their love. Second, I was going to take the vacation I had been putting off since my divorce and treat myself to something beautiful and healing. I opened my laptop and started researching flights to Iceland. Iceland had been on my bucket list since college when I wrote a research paper about Nordic culture and fell in love with photos of otherworldly landscapes that looked like they belonged on another planet. During my marriage, Marcus had always dismissed my travel dreams as expensive fantasies and insisted we spend vacation money on practical things like home improvements and his golf equipment. Now sitting in my small apartment with divorce settlement, money sitting untouched in my savings account, I realized I finally had the freedom to go anywhere I wanted without asking permission or justifying the expense to someone else. I spent the entire Sunday researching flights, hotels, and tour packages for Iceland. The trip would be expensive, especially on such short notice, but the dates aligned perfectly with Chloe's wedding weekend. While my family celebrated her marriage in Sedona, I would be watching the northern lights dance across Arctic skies. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. They were choosing desert heat and red rock formations. I was choosing ice and ethereal beauty. They were celebrating conformity and family tradition. I was embracing adventure and independence. I booked a 4-day, 3-night package that included a boutique hotel in Reykjavik Northern Lights tours, glacier hiking, and visits to geothermal hot springs. The total cost was nearly $3,000 more than I had ever spent on myself at one time, but it felt like an investment in my emotional recovery. When I called my best friend Madison to tell her about my spontaneous travel plans, she was initially supportive and excited. "Ruby, this is exactly what you need," she said enthusiastically. "You've been torturing yourself over this wedding situation for weeks. Getting away from all the family drama and treating yourself to something amazing is the healthiest thing you could possibly do." Madison had been my closest friend since we met in a post-divorce support group 6 months earlier. She understood the particular pain of having your entire social world restructured when a marriage ends, and she had been my strongest advocate throughout the family conflict. "I'm so proud of you for choosing yourself over their dysfunction," she continued. "Iceland is going to be incredible, and the timing is perfect. While they're all pretending everything is fine at that wedding, you'll be having a genuine adventure and creating real memories." But as I shared more details about my plans, Madison picked up on something in my voice that made her pause. "Ruby," she said carefully, "please tell me you're going to Iceland just for yourself and not as some kind of revenge against your family." I hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "I might share a few photos on social media," I admitted, "just to show that I'm doing fine without them, that I'm not sitting at home crying while they celebrate." "Sharing a few travel photos is fine," Madison said slowly, "but I can hear something else in your voice. What aren't you telling me?" I took a deep breath and confessed my real plan. I'm gonna document the entire trip and post everything during the exact same hours as Chloe's wedding events. While she's walking down the aisle, I'll be posting photos of myself in this incredible landscape, showing everyone what they're missing by excluding me. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Ruby." Madison finally said, her voice heavy with concern. "That's not healing. That's revenge. And revenge like that is going to make everything worse, not better." "How could it possibly be worse?" I asked defensively. "They've already legally threatened me and blocked me from family events. They've turned everyone against me and painted me as the problem. What do I have to lose?" "Your dignity," Madison said bluntly. "Your chance at real reconciliation someday. Your ability to take the high road and eventually rebuild these relationships from a position of strength." But I was too hurt and angry to listen to reason. "I'm not trying to rebuild anything," I said. "I'm trying to show them that their rejection doesn't define me, that I can be happy without their approval." "There's a difference between being happy without their approval and trying to make them jealous," Madison replied. "One is healthy independence, and the other is just another form of letting them control your emotions." We ended the conversation without resolving the disagreement, but her words stuck with me as I finalized my travel arrangements and started packing for the trip. Part of me knew she was right about the revenge aspect being unhealthy, but another part of me felt entitled to some form of justice after months of emotional abuse and exclusion. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, then maybe it was time to show them exactly what they were missing. I spent Monday shopping for warm clothes and waterproof gear, Tuesday getting my passport and travel documents organized, and Wednesday creating a detailed itinerary that would allow me to post compelling content during every major wedding event. While Chloe had her rehearsal dinner, I would be arriving in Reykjavik and sharing photos of the midnight sun. During her morning preparation time, I would be exploring waterfalls and posting videos of myself in flowing dresses against dramatic backdrops. When she walked down the aisle, I would be standing on a glacier surrounded by the kind of natural beauty that no wedding venue could compete with. The plan felt perfect in its symmetry and devastating in its potential impact. The flight from Phoenix to Reykjavik took 14 hours with a layover in Denver, giving me plenty of time to second-guess my decision and imagine all the ways this trip could backfire. But when I stepped off the plane into Keflavik International Airport and felt the crisp October air that smelled like snow and possibility, I knew I had made the right choice. Iceland was everything the travel blogs had promised and more. Even the drive from the airport to Reykjavik revealed landscapes that looked like they had been painted by someone with an imagination too wild for reality. Black volcanic rock stretched for miles, broken up by patches of bright green moss that seemed to glow against the dark stone. Steam rose from geothermal vents in the distance, creating an ethereal atmosphere that made me feel like I was entering a fairy tale. My hotel, the Hotel Borg, was a beautiful Art Deco building in the heart of Reykjavik that had been restored to vintage elegance. My room overlooked the harbor where colorful fishing boats bobbed in water so blue it looked artificial. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax as I stood at the window watching seabirds dive for fish while the afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. That evening, I joined a Northern Lights tour that would take our small group outside the city, where light pollution wouldn't interfere with viewing the aurora borealis. The tour guide was an American expat named Carson, who had moved to Iceland 5 years earlier, and spoke about the country with the passion of someone who had found his true home. Carson was probably in his mid-30s with kind brown eyes and the sort of genuine warmth that made strangers feel comfortable sharing personal stories. As our bus drove through the countryside toward our viewing location, he noticed that I seemed emotionally fragile and gently drew me into conversation. "The first time in Iceland?" he asked, settling into the seat beside me as other tour participants chatted among themselves. "Yes," I said, surprised by how much I wanted to talk to this stranger. It's kind of a spontaneous trip. I needed to get away from some family situations back home. Carson nodded knowingly. Iceland is good for that. There's something about this landscape that puts human problems into perspective. When you're standing next to a 1,000-year-old glacier or watching the northern lights dance across the sky, family drama starts to feel pretty small in comparison. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Carson was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the stark beauty passing by. "I came here 5 years ago after my family disowned me for being gay. Small-town Texas wasn't ready for their golden boy son to bring home a boyfriend instead of a girlfriend." The pain in his voice was familiar, the same ache of family rejection that had been living in my chest for months. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "That must have been devastating." "It was," he admitted. "For the first 2 years, I was angry and bitter. I wanted them to suffer for rejecting me. I posted constantly on social media about how happy I was without them, how much better my life was in Iceland, how they were missing out on knowing the real me." My stomach tightened as I recognized my own planned behavior in his description. "Did it worsen them?" I asked. "Did it make you feel better?" Carson turned to look at me directly, his expression gentle but serious. It made me feel powerful in the moment, but it didn't heal anything. If anything, it made the situation worse because it convinced them they had been right about me being selfish and attention-seeking. It took me 3 years to realize that trying to make them jealous was just another way of letting them control my emotions. The bus pulled into a remote location where the only lights came from our headlamps and the faint glow of Reykjavik in the distance. As we climbed out into the cold night air, Carson continued our conversation. "The thing about revenge through social media," he said as we walked toward the viewing area, "is that it feels like justice, but it actually just perpetuates the cycle of hurt. Every post designed to make them feel bad is really just you announcing that they still have power over your happiness." I wanted to argue with him to defend my carefully crafted plan for wedding weekend posting, but his words resonated with uncomfortable truth. "So what's the alternative?" I asked. "Just let them treat me badly and pretend it doesn't hurt?" "The alternative is healing yourself independent of their approval or disapproval," Carson said. "It's posting about Iceland because you're genuinely excited about being here, not because you want to make someone else feel bad about missing it." As if on cue, the northern lights began to appear in the sky above us, starting as a faint green glow and gradually intensifying into dancing ribbons of color that moved across the darkness like living art. The entire tour group fell silent, everyone transfixed by the otherworldly beauty unfolding overhead. I found myself crying as I watched the aurora dance, not from sadness, but from something deeper and more complex. For the first time in months, I was experiencing pure beauty without any connection to my family drama. This moment belonged entirely to me, and no one could take it away or diminish it with their judgment. Carson stood beside me in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out different formations in the lights, or sharing facts about the science behind the phenomenon. His presence was calming and non-judgmental, the kind of companionship I hadn't experienced since before my marriage started falling apart. When the lights finally faded and we returned to the bus, I felt different somehow, not healed completely, but open to the possibility that healing might be possible if I could learn to create experiences that belong to me alone rather than being reactions to other people's behavior. "Thank you," I said to Carson as we drove back toward Reykjavik. "For what?" "For helping me see that there might be a better way to do this." He smiled and patted my shoulder gently. "Iceland has a way of clarifying things. Give it a few more days here and you might be surprised by how differently you see your whole situation." Despite Carson's wise words and my emotional breakthrough under the northern lights, old habits and wounded pride proved stronger than new insights. The next morning, as I prepared to explore Reykjavik and its surrounding natural wonders, I found myself opening Instagram and carefully composing my first post from Iceland. The photo showed me standing at the edge of Reykjavik harbor, wearing a flowing emerald green dress that contrasted beautifully with the dramatic sky and colorful buildings reflected in the water. My hair was loose and windblown, and I was smiling genuinely at the camera, looking happier and more radiant than I had in any photo from the past year. I crafted the caption carefully. "Sometimes the universe pushes you toward exactly where you need to be. Grateful for unexpected journeys and the courage to choose myself. Finding my real family in the most unexpected places." The post was designed to look like simple travel gratitude, but the timing and word choices were deliberate. I knew my family would see it and understand the subtext. While they were busy with wedding preparations in Arizona, I was creating my own adventure and building new connections with people who actually appreciated my company. Within an hour, the post had received more likes and comments than anything I had shared in months. Friends from college coworkers from my old job and even casual acquaintances were responding with enthusiasm about my Iceland adventure. Several people commented that I looked happier than they had seen me in years, and multiple friends asked about my travel plans and expressed envy about the destination. But most importantly, I noticed that several family members had viewed my Instagram story even though they had blocked me from other forms of communication. My cousin Jessica had liked the post, then quickly unliked it. Uncle Ted had viewed my story but hadn't interacted with the content. They were watching. They were paying attention, and that knowledge filled me with a sense of power I hadn't felt in months. Emboldened by the positive response, I spent this day exploring Reykjavik's colorful streets and unique architecture, documenting everything with an artist's eye for composition and lighting. I photographed the famous Hallgrímskirkja church from multiple angles, capturing myself in front of its dramatic concrete spires that reached toward the cloudy sky like a modern cathedral. At the Perlin Museum, I posed next to the interactive Northern Lights display, my face illuminated by artificial aurora as I smiled with wonder and joy. The photo was stunning, showing me surrounded by swirling colors that made me look like I was part of some magical fairy tale. Each post was carefully timed to coincide with wedding-related activities happening back home. While Chloe was probably having her final dress fitting, I was sharing videos of myself exploring the Harpa Concert Hall, its geometric glass facade creating rainbow reflections that danced across my skin. When family members would typically be gathering for the rehearsal dinner, I posted a series of photos from my gourmet meal at Dill, one of Reykjavik's most prestigious restaurants. The artistic presentation of Icelandic cuisine looked exotic and sophisticated compared to the standard American wedding fare my family was probably enjoying. The response to my content continued to grow throughout the day. A travel blogger with 50,000 followers had reposted one of my harbor photos, adding a comment about how Iceland was perfect for solo female travelers seeking spiritual renewal. Her repost brought dozens of new followers to my account and several direct messages asking about my travel itinerary and photography techniques. By evening, I was receiving messages from strangers sharing their own stories of family conflict and personal transformation. A woman from Seattle wrote about her decision to skip her sister's wedding after years of emotional abuse. A man from Florida described his solo trip to New Zealand after his family rejected his career change from lawyer to artist. My Iceland adventure was resonating with people far beyond my personal circle, creating connections and conversations I had never anticipated. The positive feedback and genuine interest from strangers started to overshadow my original motivation for the trip. But late that night, as I reviewed the day's posts before going to sleep, I received a direct message that reminded me why I had started this social media campaign in the first place. It was from my Aunt Karen. "Ruby, your Iceland photos are beautiful and you look genuinely happy. I hope you know that some of us miss you and wish things could be different with the family situation. I can't say much because of all the drama, but I want you to know that excluding you from the wedding doesn't feel right to me. I hope someday we can all heal from this mess." The message was exactly what I had hoped to achieve with my posts. I was making family members question the narrative about me being toxic and problematic. I was showing them that I could be happy and successful without their approval, and that their loss was greater than mine. I screenshot the message and saved it as evidence that my strategy was working. Tomorrow would bring even more dramatic content as I explored Iceland's natural wonders, and by wedding weekend, I would have built such a compelling narrative about my independence and joy that my family would be forced to confront what they had given up when they chose to exclude me. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear in Iceland, the kind of perfect weather that made me believe the universe was conspiring to make my revenge posts as beautiful as possible. While Chloe was probably waking up in her childhood bedroom in Phoenix, surrounded by bridesmaids and wedding preparations, I was preparing for the most spectacular day of my Iceland adventure. I had booked an early morning tour to Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, a otherworldly location where massive icebergs floated in a lake that looked like liquid sapphire. The drive took nearly 5 hours from Reykjavik, but every mile revealed new landscapes that left me speechless with their alien beauty. My tour guide, a cheerful Icelandic woman named Sigrid, explained that Jökulsárlón was one of the most photographed locations in the world, featured in multiple Hollywood films because of its dramatic scenery. As we approached the lagoon, I understood why. The sight took my breath away completely. Enormous icebergs, some as large as houses, floated serenely in water, so blue it seemed artificial. The ice formations were sculpted by wind and water into fantastic shapes that looked like abstract art created by nature itself. Some icebergs were pure white. Others were streaked with blue veins that seemed to glow from within, and a few had been carved into arches and caves that looked like frozen cathedrals. I had brought a flowing white dress specifically for this location, not a wedding dress, but something ethereal and elegant that would create a striking contrast against the dramatic landscape. The dress was made of lightweight chiffon that moved beautifully in the wind, and I had paired it with a cream-colored wool coat that I could remove for photos. Sigrid was an enthusiastic photographer who understood Instagram aesthetics, and she helped me capture images that looked like they belonged in a high-fashion magazine rather than a tourist album. We spent 2 hours creating content at different spots around the lagoon, with me posing on black volcanic sand beaches where smaller icebergs had washed ashore like scattered diamonds. The resulting photos were absolutely stunning. In one, I stood waist deep in the lagoon surrounded by floating ice, my white dress billowing around me like I was some kind of ice goddess. Another captured me, sitting on a small iceberg, my reflection perfectly mirrored in the still water, while massive glacial formations towered behind me. But the video I created was the real masterpiece. I set up my phone on a tripod and recorded myself walking across the black sand beach toward the lagoon, my dress flowing dramatically in the wind as icebergs provided a backdrop that looked like something from a fantasy film. The audio captured the sound of wind and lapping water, creating an ethereal atmosphere that made the whole scene look like a music video. I carefully edited the video to remove any tourist sounds or evidence of other people, making it appear as though I had this incredible location entirely to myself. Then I crafted a caption that was poetic and inspirational, standing in a place where time moves differently, surrounded by ice that has existed for thousands of years. Sometimes you have to travel to the end of the world to remember who you really are, celebrating new beginnings in the most beautiful way possible. The timing of the post was deliberate and cruel. Based on the wedding timeline I had memorized from social media posts, Chloe would be in the middle of her morning preparation routine when I shared this content. While she was dealing with hair and makeup stress in a crowded hotel room, I was sharing footage of myself looking like a goddess in one of the most spectacular natural settings on Earth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The video gained hundreds of views within the first hour, with comments praising both the cinematography and my radiant appearance. Several followers asked if I was a professional model or travel influencer, commenting that my content looked like it belonged in a tourism campaign. But more importantly, I could see through Instagram analytics that numerous family members had viewed the content multiple times. Someone was sharing my posts with people who had blocked me because I was getting views from accounts I couldn't identify, but that seemed connected to my Arizona network. A lifestyle blogger with over 100,000 followers reposted my lagoon video to her stories, adding text that read, "This is what self-love looks like." Sometimes the best celebrations happen when you choose yourself over toxic situations. Her repost brought thousands of new views to my content and dozens of direct messages from strangers who connected with the message about choosing yourself over family dysfunction. Many people shared their own stories of missing family events to protect their mental health, creating a supportive community around my posts that felt more genuine than any family gathering I had experienced in years. By afternoon, my Iceland content had attracted the attention of a small production company that specialized in travel and lifestyle documentaries. They sent a direct message asking if I would be interested in being interviewed about my solo travel experience and the story behind my dramatic Iceland escape. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's rejection was leading to opportunities and connections I never could have imagined. While they were celebrating Chloe's conventional wedding in Arizona, I was building a platform and audience that could potentially change my entire career trajectory. But even as I savored the success of my social media strategy, Carson's words from the Northern Lights tour echoed in my mind. Was this genuine healing and growth, or was I still letting my family's behavior control my choices? The growing attention and positive feedback felt intoxicating, but underneath the excitement was a nagging question about whether I was building something real or just creating an elaborate performance designed to make other people feel bad. As evening approached in Iceland and wedding time drew near in Arizona, I prepared for the next phase of my content strategy, knowing that the most devastating posts were yet to come. As Saturday evening approached in Iceland, which meant late afternoon wedding time in Arizona, I settled into my hotel room to monitor the wedding proceedings through social media while preparing my final series of Iceland posts. I had created a detailed schedule that would allow me to share content during every major wedding moment, ensuring maximum impact when family members checked their phones between ceremony and reception events. But as I refreshed various family members' social media accounts, I noticed something unexpected. Instead of the carefully curated wedding content I had anticipated seeing, there were increasingly frantic posts about weather concerns and logistical problems. My cousin Jessica, who had been documenting every aspect of wedding preparation for the past week, posted an Instagram story that made my stomach drop. Pray for no flash floods today. The Weather Service just issued a warning for the Sedona area, and we're all hoping the outdoor ceremony can still happen as planned. I immediately Googled Sedona weather alerts and found multiple news sources reporting on an unusual October storm system that was bringing heavy rainfall to northern Arizona. The National Weather Service had issued flash flood warnings for the exact area where Chloe's wedding venue was located, with particular concern about low-lying areas and creek beds that could become dangerous within minutes. The venue Chloe had chosen was a luxury resort built alongside a normally dry creek bed, selected specifically for its dramatic red rock backdrops and natural water features. In normal weather, it was breathtakingly beautiful. In flash flood conditions, it could become inaccessible or even dangerous. Over the next hour, I watched through various social media accounts as the weather situation deteriorated rapidly. Uncle Ted posted a Facebook update. Roads to the wedding venue are starting to flood. Everyone please drive carefully and allow extra time. Sandra, my mother's best friend, shared a photo from the resort showing dark clouds gathering over the red rocks with the caption, "Mother Nature might have other plans for today's celebration." But it was a local news station's social media account that revealed the full scope of the disaster unfolding. They posted aerial footage of the resort area showing water rushing through normally dry creek beds and pooling in low areas around the venue. The access road was completely flooded, making it impossible for wedding guests to reach the location. As I sat in my beautiful hotel room overlooking peaceful Reykjavik harbor, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, watching my family's carefully planned celebration dissolve into chaos. Part of me felt vindicated, as if the universe itself was confirming that excluding me had been a mistake that led to cosmic justice. But a larger part of me felt genuinely sad for Chloe, whose dream wedding was being destroyed by circumstances completely beyond anyone's control. I remembered being a little girl and listening to her describe her perfect wedding day, always set in a beautiful outdoor location with stunning natural backdrops. Now that vision was literally washing away in floodwater. The social media updates became increasingly desperate as the afternoon progressed. Jessica posted a video from inside the resort lobby showing dozens of formally dressed wedding guests milling around helplessly while staff members made phone calls trying to arrange alternative plans. My mother shared a Facebook post that was uncharacteristically emotional. Please keep our family in your prayers today. What was supposed to be the happiest day has turned into a nightmare of stress and disappointment. We're trying to find solutions, but everything seems impossible. The vulnerability in her post was something I hadn't seen from my mother in years. She was typically so controlling and image conscious that admitting to problems or asking for help was completely out of character. As evening fell in Iceland and the situation in Arizona became increasingly hopeless, I realized I was facing a moment of truth about my own character and values. I could continue with my planned social media campaign, posting beautiful content, while my sister's wedding collapsed, knowing that it would appear callous and cruel to anyone following both narratives. Or I could choose a different path, one that prioritized compassion over revenge and healing over winning. I called Carson, the tour guide who had become an unexpected source of wisdom during my Iceland stay. I need some advice, I said when he answered. The wedding I've been trying to upstage is falling apart due to flooding, and I don't know how to feel about it. How do you want to feel about it? He asked gently. That question stopped me short. I realized I had been so focused on what I thought I deserved to feel or what would be strategically advantageous to feel that I hadn't considered what kind of person I actually wanted to be in this situation. I want to feel compassionate, I admitted. Even after everything they've done to hurt me, I don't want to be someone who celebrates other people's misery. Then you have your answer, Carson said. The question now is what you're going to do with that clarity. As I hung up the phone and looked out at the serene beauty of Reykjavik at midnight, I knew I was about to make a choice that would define not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of who I was as a person. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in months. It was my mother calling from the middle of her daughter's wedding disaster, and I had to decide whether to answer. I stared at my mother's name on my phone screen for what felt like an eternity before finally swiping to answer. The sound of her voice, thick with tears and desperation, caught me completely off guard. Patricia's voice cracked through the phone connection. Oh, honey, I know I have no right to call you after everything that's happened, but I don't know what else to do. In the background, I could hear the chaos of the wedding disaster. Voices talking over each other, someone crying, and what sounded like heavy rain against windows. The composed, controlling mother who had legally threatened me just weeks ago was gone, replaced by a woman who sounded broken and terrified. Mom, I said carefully, my own voice catching with unexpected emotion. What's happening? Oh, the whole wedding is ruined, she sobbed. The venue is completely flooded. The access road is washed out. 300 guests are stranded at hotels or around Sedona with nowhere to go, and Chloe is having a complete breakdown. We've called every venue within 50 miles, and everything is either booked or also dealing with flood damage. I could hear Chloe crying hysterically in the background, her voice high-pitched and panicked in a way that took me back to childhood when she would have nightmares and only I could calm her down. I know we treated you terribly, my mother continued, her words tumbling out between sobs. I know we hurt you and excluded you and made you feel like you didn't matter, but you were always the one who could fix things when everything fell apart. You organized my surprise birthday party when your father forgot. You planned the whole family reunion when I was overwhelmed. You always knew how to solve problems that seemed impossible. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. For months, I had been painted as the source of family problems, the person whose presence would ruin special occasions. Now, in their moment of crisis, I was suddenly remembered as the family problem solver, the one with connections and organizational skills that could save the day. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my emotions churned. We need help finding a venue for tomorrow, Patricia said desperately. Or even tonight if possible. You know people in the event planning industry from your old job. You understand how to negotiate with vendors and make impossible things happen. Chloe's dress is perfect, the flowers are beautiful, the guests are all here, but we have nowhere for the ceremony to take place. Through the phone, I could hear my sister's voice getting closer as someone handed her the phone. Ruby. Chloe's voice was raw from crying, stripped of all the coldness and superiority she had shown me at her workplace just days earlier. I know, I don't deserve to ask you for anything after how I treated you. I know I was cruel and unfair, and I believed things about you that weren't true. Her words hit me like physical blows, not because they were hurtful, but because they represented the acknowledgement I had been desperately craving for months. I was so scared of drama at my wedding that I created the biggest drama possible by excluding the one person who actually cared enough to help. Chloe continued, I threw away our relationship because I was listening to other people instead of trusting my own heart. And now everything is falling apart, and all I can think about is how much I wish you were here to help me figure it out. I closed my eyes and leaned against the window of my hotel room, looking out at the peaceful Reykjavik harbor while my family's crisis unfolded thousands of miles away. Carson's words about choosing the person I wanted to be echoed in my mind, competing with months of accumulated hurt and resentment. Even if I wanted to help, I said slowly, I'm in Iceland. I can't physically do anything from here. But you could make phone calls, my mother interjected hopefully. You could use your connections and your expertise to find options we haven't thought of. You always see solutions that other people miss. I realized that this was my moment of ultimate power in the family dynamic. They needed me desperately, and I could set whatever terms I wanted for my assistance. I could demand apologies, explanations, guarantees about future treatment, even financial compensation for my help. Or I could choose to help them, because it was the right thing to do regardless of what I might gain from the situation. I need to think about this, I said finally. Give me 1 hour to see what I can find out, and I'll call you back. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the next hour would determine not just whether Chloe's wedding could be saved, but whether I could salvage any hope of rebuilding relationships with my family based on mutual respect rather than desperation. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, staring out at Reykjavik's colorful rooftops, feeling torn between conflicting desires for justice and compassion. On my laptop screen, I had pulled up contact information for my former colleague Sarah Martinez, who had become one of Phoenix's most successful event planners after we worked together at a corporate retreat company 3 years ago. Sarah and I had maintained a friendly, professional relationship even after my divorce, and I knew she had connections throughout Arizona's hospitality industry. If anyone could work miracles on 24 hours' notice, it would be her. But calling Sarah would mean actively helping the family that had legally threatened me and systematically excluded me from their lives. It would mean setting aside my justified anger to solve problems for people who had painted me as the source of their problems. My phone buzzed with a text from Carson. How are you processing everything? Remember that the choice you make tonight will define who you are long after this crisis passes. I called Carson instead of responding by text, needing to hear a friendly voice while I wrestled with this impossible decision. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Part of me wants to help because it's the right thing to do, but another part of me feels like helping them now just enables their bad behavior. If I save the day, will they even remember how badly they treated me once the crisis is over? Those are valid concerns, Carson said thoughtfully, but let me ask you this if you help them. Are you doing it because you want something from them in return, or because you want to be the kind of person who helps family members in crisis, regardless of how they've treated you? The question cut straight to the heart of my internal conflict. Was my hesitation about self-protection and boundaries, or was it about maintaining my victim narrative and punishing them for their rejection? I guess I'm afraid that if I help them, it means what they did to me wasn't that bad, I said slowly, like I'm invalidating my own pain by choosing to be compassionate. Helping them doesn't erase what they did to you, Carson replied. Your pain and anger are completely valid, regardless of how you choose to respond to their current crisis. The question is whether holding on to that pain is serving your long-term happiness and growth. As we talked, I found myself thinking about my viral Iceland posts and the community of support I had built around my story of family exclusion. Hundreds of strangers had connected with my experience and found inspiration in my independence and strength. Would helping my family now betray that narrative and disappoint the people who saw me as a symbol of standing up to toxic family dynamics? There's something else, I told Carson. My Iceland posts have gone viral, and I've built this whole narrative about escaping family toxicity and choosing myself. People are looking to me as an example of how to handle family rejection. If I help them now, does that make me a hypocrite? Carson was quiet for a long moment before responding. Ruby, healing isn't a performance for other people. Real growth sometimes means making choices that disappoint your audience because they're the right choices for your own development as a person. After we hung up, I called Sarah Martinez, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. Ruby, Sarah answered enthusiastically. How are you doing? I've been following your Iceland adventure on social media. Those photos are absolutely stunning. Thank you, I said, feeling suddenly embarrassed about the performative aspects of my posting. Actually, I'm calling because I need a huge favor, and it's complicated. I explained the wedding disaster situation without going into details about the family conflict, simply saying that my sister's wedding had been ruined by flooding and they needed emergency venue assistance. Oh my God, that's terrible, Sarah exclaimed. October flash floods are so unpredictable. Let me think about what might be available on such short notice. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah made phone calls on my behalf while I waited anxiously in my hotel room. She contacted luxury hotels, event spaces, even private estates that might be able to accommodate a last-minute wedding. Finally, she called me back with news that seemed too good to be true. I have a connection at the Desert Mountain Resort, she said excitedly. It's a luxury resort in North Scottsdale with gorgeous outdoor ceremony spaces. The owner, James Morrison, is a friend of mine, and he had a wedding cancellation for tomorrow due to a family emergency. He's willing to host Chloe's wedding at no charge if you'll do some social media promotion for the resort using your Iceland photos as a comparison showcase. I was stunned. At no charge for a 300-person wedding. He's been following your Iceland content because I shared it with him, Sarah explained. He thinks your story about choosing yourself and creating beautiful experiences would be perfect marketing for his resort's wellness and transformation retreats. If you're willing to do some posts about how the resort provided healing space for family reconciliation, he'll donate the venue catering and event coordination. The offer was incredible, but it came with strings that made me uncomfortable. James Morrison wanted to use my family's crisis and my personal journey for marketing purposes, turning our reconciliation into content for his business. But it was also exactly the kind of solution that could save Chloe's wedding and potentially repair relationships that I wasn't ready to give up on completely. I need to think about it, I told Sarah, and I need to call my family back with the details. As I prepared to call my mother with this unexpected option, I realized that accepting the offer would mean publicly documenting my return to the family and my decision to help them effectively ending the narrative of righteous independence that had gained me so much support and attention. But maybe I thought as I dialed my mother's number, it was time to choose growth over performance and healing over being right. When I called my mother back with news about the Desert Mountain Resort offer, the relief in her voice was so profound that it made me realize how desperate their situation had truly become. A luxury resort willing to host the wedding for free, Patricia repeated, her voice shaking. Ruby, this is a miracle. How did you manage to arrange something like this so quickly? I still have connections from my event planning days, I said deliberately, keeping my tone neutral, but there are conditions we need to discuss before I confirm anything. The word conditions seemed to sober my mother immediately. I could almost hear her shifting back into negotiation mode, preparing to manage whatever demands I might make. What kind of conditions? She asked carefully. First, the resort owner wants social media promotion in exchange for donating the venue. I explained. He wants me to document the wedding and post content about how the resort facilitates family healing and reconciliation. That seems reasonable, Patricia said quickly. We can definitely do that. Second, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I have my own conditions for returning to help with this wedding. I want a public apology from you and Chloe acknowledging that excluding me was wrong and hurtful. I want grandmother's ring returned to me as it was promised to me as the eldest granddaughter. And I want a written agreement that I will not be excluded from future family events based on other people's discomfort with my presence. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice smaller and more vulnerable than I had heard in years. Yeah, Ruby, you're absolutely right to ask for those things. We were wrong to exclude you, and we were wrong to take away your inheritance and give it to Chloe. I know that doesn't undo the hurt we've caused, but if you're willing to help us, we'll agree to all of your conditions. The ease with which she accepted my terms was almost anticlimactic. I had expected arguments, negotiations, attempts to minimize their behavior or justify their choices. Instead, I was hearing something I hadn't expected: genuine accountability. There's one more thing, I said. The wedding needs to be postponed by 1 day to accommodate my travel time. I can't get back to Arizona until tomorrow afternoon. We'll make it work, my mother said immediately. Most of the guests are already planning to stay an extra day because of the flooding anyway. We'll contact everyone about the delay and new location. As we worked through logistical details, I found myself feeling unexpectedly emotional about the prospect of returning home. For months, I had fantasized about moments when my family would recognize my value and beg for my forgiveness. But the reality felt more complex and bittersweet than triumphant. After hanging up with my mother, I called the airline to change my flight and then contacted Sarah to confirm the resort arrangement. As I made these practical arrangements, my phone started buzzing with social media notifications. Somehow, word about my potential involvement in saving Chloe's wedding had reached the travel and lifestyle bloggers who had been following my Iceland story. A prominent influencer named Katie Chen had posted a story questioning whether I was abandoning my empowerment narrative to rescue the same family that rejected me. Her post sparked dozens of comments from people who had connected with my story of independence and self-advocacy. Some supporters understood my choice to help family in crisis, but others felt betrayed by what they saw as my capitulation to toxic family dynamics. One comment particularly stung. This is exactly why families think they can treat people badly and still expect rescue when convenient. Ruby is setting a terrible example for other people in similar situations. Another follower wrote, I've been inspired by Ruby's Iceland journey and her choice to prioritize self-care over family pressure. I really hope she doesn't give up her power just because they're suddenly desperate for her help. Reading these responses made me realize that my personal journey had become entangled with other people's expectations and political views about family relationships. Strangers who had never met my family were invested in my choice to maintain distance from them, seeing my story as validation of their own family conflicts. The pressure to remain consistent with my public narrative felt almost as constraining as my family's original expectations had been. I was trapped between disappointing supporters who saw me as a symbol of resistance and disappointing family members who needed my help. But As I looked out at Reykjavik harbor one last time before packing for my return flight, I realized that the most important relationship I needed to maintain was the one with myself, and the person I wanted to be was someone who could hold boundaries when necessary and extend compassion when possible, regardless of how either choice played on social media. I posted one final Iceland photo, a sunset over the harbor, with a caption that read, "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is change your mind when you discover new information about yourself and your values. Growth doesn't always look like consistency. Tomorrow, I'm flying home to help my sister's wedding, not because our conflict is resolved, but because helping family in crisis aligns with who I want to be. Thank you to everyone who supported my journey here. The healing continues in unexpected ways." The post received mixed reactions, but I found that I cared less about managing other people's opinions than I had just days earlier. Iceland had given me something more valuable than social media validation: clarity about my own values, independent of external approval. The flight from Reykjavik to Phoenix felt interminable, giving me 12 hours to second-guess my decision and imagine all the ways the family reunion could go wrong. Would they actually follow through on their promises once the crisis was over? Would my presence at the wedding create the drama they had originally feared? Had I made a mistake by giving up my position of strength to help people who had legally threatened me just weeks ago? When I finally walked through the Phoenix airport terminal, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, I was surprised to see Chloe waiting for me at the gate instead of my mother. She looked smaller and more vulnerable than I remembered, her usually perfect appearance replaced by the puffy eyes and pale complexion of someone who had been crying for days. "Ruby," she said, her voice breaking as soon as she saw me, "thank you for coming back. I know I don't deserve your help after everything I did." The hug she gave me was desperate and clingy, like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. For a moment, we were just two sisters who had missed each other before the weight of recent conflicts reasserted itself. "How is everyone doing?" I asked as we walked toward baggage claim. "Stressed, grateful, and honestly kind of ashamed," Chloe admitted. "When the flooding started and everything fell apart, all anyone could talk about was how you would have had backup plans and emergency contacts. Mom kept saying we never should have excluded the one person who actually knew how to handle disasters." The drive to the desert mountain resort took us through familiar Arizona landscapes that looked different to me after 4 days in Iceland's otherworldly terrain. The desert colors seemed more muted, the suburban sprawl more claustrophobic than I remembered. "I need to apologize for more than just the wedding exclusion," Chloe said as we navigated traffic on the I-17. "I was jealous of you for having the courage to leave Marcus when you realized he was wrong for you. Instead of supporting you, I judged you because admitting you were brave meant acknowledging that I was settling for safe choices instead of pursuing what I really wanted." Her confession surprised me. "What do you mean?" "David is a good guy and I love him, but I rushed into this engagement because I was scared of ending up alone like you seemed to be after your divorce. I was so focused on avoiding your mistakes that I didn't realize you were actually the stronger one for being willing to start over when something wasn't working." The vulnerability in her admission made me see our conflict from a completely different perspective. I had been so focused on the pain of exclusion that I hadn't considered the insecurity and fear that might have motivated their treatment of me. When we arrived at the desert mountain resort, I was struck by its understated elegance. The property blended seamlessly with the Sonoran desert landscape, featuring adobe architecture and native plant gardens that made the buildings look like they had grown naturally from the red earth. James Morrison, the resort owner, greeted us personally with the kind of warm professionalism that immediately put nervous brides at ease. He was probably in his 50s with silver hair and the confident demeanor of someone who had built a successful business by understanding how to make people feel special during important moments. "Ruby," he said, shaking my hand warmly. Your Iceland documentation was absolutely inspiring. We're honored to be part of continuing your story of family healing and personal growth. The way he framed the situation made me slightly uncomfortable, as if my family's crisis was just another chapter in a marketable narrative about transformation and reconciliation. But the genuine kindness in his eyes and the obvious relief on Chloe's face reminded me why I had chosen to help rather than judge. The next several hours passed in a whirlwind of wedding logistics made even more complex by the venue change and one-day delay. Vendors needed to be contacted and redirected, guest accommodations required updating, and the entire event timeline had to be restructured around the new location's capabilities. But what surprised me most was how naturally I fell back into the role of family problem solver, working alongside relatives who had blocked me on social media just days earlier. Uncle Ted, who had posted about protecting the family from toxic individuals, now sought my opinion on seating arrangements and dietary restrictions. Aunt Karen, who had been afraid to publicly support me during the conflict, now deferred to my expertise about coordinating with photographers and musicians. My mother approached me as I was working with the resort's event coordinator to finalize catering details. Wooby. Patricia said quietly, I need you to know that watching you organize all of this while we're in crisis has reminded me of something I forgot during all the drama. You've always been the one who takes care of everyone else even when you're hurting. Especially when you're hurting. She pulled out a small velvet box that I recognized immediately. This belongs to you, she said, opening it to reveal our grandmother's Art Deco engagement ring. It should have been yours from the beginning, and giving it to Chloe was just another way we hurt you while trying to rewrite family history. Taking the ring back felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity that had been stolen along with my place in the family narrative. As I slipped it onto my right hand, I felt a connection to my grandmother's strength and independence that reminded me why I had survived this difficult period. But the most meaningful moment came when Chloe approached me as evening fell and the resort staff was making final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony. I have something to ask you, she said nervously. I know it's probably too much to ask after everything that's happened, but would you consider being my maid of honor tomorrow? Not because we need you to save the wedding, but because I can't imagine getting married without my sister standing beside me. The request was everything I had dreamed of hearing for months, but receiving it now felt more complex than vindication. It was an acknowledgement of relationship and value that came from crisis rather than genuine reconciliation. And I wasn't sure whether accepting would represent healing or just another form of enabling dysfunctional family patterns. I'll think about it tonight, I told her, but regardless of what I decide about the maid of honor role, I'll be there tomorrow to support you and make sure everything goes smoothly. As I settled into my resort room that night, I realized that returning home had given me something more valuable than family approval. The knowledge that I could choose compassion without sacrificing my boundaries, and that helping others didn't require me to accept mistreatment or minimize my own needs. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright in Arizona, a perfect contrast to the chaos and storms of the previous day. As I prepared for Chloe's wedding at the Desert Mountain Resort, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for months. The decision to serve as maid of honor had come to me sometime during the night, not as capitulation to family pressure, but as a choice to participate in celebration rather than conflict. The bridal suite was a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sonoran Desert, where saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels against the backdrop of distant mountains. Chloe sat in front of a vanity mirror while a makeup artist worked on her face, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, despite her attempts to appear calm. "How are you feeling?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Nervous," she admitted. Not about marrying David, but about whether I deserve to have everything work out after the way I treated you. It feels like karma that the wedding almost got ruined, like the universe was punishing me for being cruel to my own sister. I reached over and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt despite everything we had been through. "You're not being punished," I said gently. "Sometimes difficult things happen to teach us what really matters. Yesterday's disaster brought our family back together in a way that might not have happened otherwise." The photographer, a woman named Maria who specialized in capturing authentic, emotional moments, documented our conversation with the kind of sensitivity that made her presence feel supportive rather than intrusive. She had worked with the resort before and understood how to balance family intimacy with the reality of wedding day schedules. As the morning progressed, other family members stopped by the bridal suite to check on Chloe and express their gratitude for my help with the wedding rescue. But the conversation that meant the most came from my mother, who arrived carrying coffee and pastries for the bridal party. "Ruby," Patricia said, settling into a chair across from where I was helping Chloe into her dress, "I need to say something that's been weighing on me since you got home yesterday." She took a deep breath before continuing. "For months, I've been telling myself that excluding you from this wedding was about protecting Chloe's special day. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from having to confront my own mistakes in how I handled your divorce situation." Her confession drew the attention of everyone in the room, including Chloe, who turned from the mirror to listen to our mother's words. "When you exposed Marcus's affair at Thanksgiving, I was embarrassed because it forced me to admit that I had encouraged you to work things out with a man who was lying to you," Patricia continued. "Instead of supporting your courage in leaving a bad situation, I made it about my own discomfort with conflict and my fear of what other people would think about our family." The vulnerability in her voice was something I hadn't heard since I was a child, dealing with my father's death, when my mother had briefly let down her guard and admitted to being scared and overwhelmed. Excluding you from the wedding wasn't about drama prevention," she said. "It was about avoiding the reminder that you had been right about Marcus and right to prioritize your own well-being over family expectations. I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than wedding invitations." The makeup artist and photographer exchanged glances, clearly moved by the unexpected family therapy session unfolding in the bridal suite. Even Chloe's college roommate, who was serving as a bridesmaid and knew nothing about our family conflict, had tears in her eyes listening to my mother's acknowledgement of her mistakes. "Well, thank you for saying that," I replied, feeling years of tension leaving my shoulders. I needed to hear that someone understood why I made the choices I did, even if they were uncomfortable for everyone else. The rest of the morning preparation took on a lighter, more celebratory tone as family relationships shifted from crisis management to genuine connection. Chloe asked me to help her with her veil, a delicate piece of vintage lace that had belonged to our grandmother. As I arranged the fabric around her face, I realized we were creating new family memories that could coexist with the painful ones from recent months. The ceremony itself was more beautiful than anything originally planned for the Sedona venue. The Desert Mountain Resort's ceremony site featured a natural amphitheater carved into red rock formations with seating arranged to take advantage of panoramic desert views. The late afternoon timing meant golden hour lighting that made everyone look radiant in photographs. Standing beside Chloe as her maid of honor wearing a dusty blue dress that complemented her wedding colors, I felt a profound sense of belonging that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with chosen love. This wasn't about forgetting past hurts or pretending conflicts hadn't happened. It was about deciding that our relationship was worth fighting for and rebuilding on healthier foundations. My maid of honor speech had been written on the plane ride home, but I modified it that morning to include reflections on family resilience and the beauty of second chances. Chloe and I have been through a difficult period recently. I began looking out at family members who had witnessed our conflict play out over social media. We've learned that loving someone doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations or pretending problems don't exist. Sometimes love requires us to hurt each other's feelings in service of truth, and sometimes it requires us to forgive each other for being imperfect humans trying to do our best. I looked directly at Chloe as I continued. What I've learned from my sister is that the strongest relationships are the ones that can survive honest conflict and come out more authentic on the other side. David, you're not just marrying a woman who makes safe choices to avoid drama. You're marrying someone who has the courage to admit when she's wrong and the strength to rebuild something better from the pieces of what was broken. The applause that followed my speech felt different from typical wedding celebration, warmed by the knowledge that everyone present had witnessed genuine reconciliation rather than performed family harmony. But the moment that truly marked our healing came during the reception when Chloe pulled me aside for a private conversation on a terrace overlooking the desert sunset. I need to tell you something about the therapist I mentioned when I excluded you from the wedding, she said, looking embarrassed. I never actually talked to any therapist about cutting you out of my life. I made that up because I thought it sounded more legitimate than admitting I was just scared and angry about family conflict. The confession was both disappointing and relieving. Disappointing because it meant there had never been professional guidance behind their decision, just fear and poor communication. Relieving because it meant there wasn't some expert opinion validating my exclusion from family events. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I want us to start over with complete honesty," she said, "and because I actually do want to find a family therapist who can help us learn better ways to handle conflict so this never happens again." As we watched the sun set over the Sonoran Desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that rivaled any Icelandic sunset I had photographed, I realized that this wedding had given our family something more valuable than a beautiful celebration. It had given us a template for handling crisis through cooperation rather than exclusion, and a model for rebuilding relationships based on accountability rather than avoidance. The Instagram posts I shared from the wedding focused not on vindication or revenge, but on the genuine joy of family reconciliation and the beauty of second chances. The response from followers was mixed, with some celebrating the healing and others questioning whether I had compromised my boundaries too easily. But for the first time in months, other people's opinions felt less important than my own sense of integrity and peace. I had chosen compassion over conflict, and the result was a relationship with my family that felt more honest and sustainable than anything we had built on previous foundations of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. 6 months after Chloe's wedding, I found myself reflecting on that transformative week while sitting in my new office overlooking downtown Phoenix. The Desert Mountain Resort Partnership had evolved into a full-time position as their director of social media and experience curation, a role that combined my event planning background with the digital storytelling skills I had accidentally developed during my Iceland adventure. The job allowed me to help other people create meaningful experiences during difficult life transitions, from divorce recovery retreats to family reconciliation workshops. My Iceland story had become part of the resort's marketing, not as a tale of family dysfunction, but as an example of how travel and introspection could lead to personal growth and healthier relationships. The viral attention from my Iceland posts had opened doors I never could have imagined during my marriage or in the immediate aftermath of my divorce. Travel companies reached out for collaborations. Lifestyle bloggers wanted to interview me about solo travel and family healing, and I had even been approached about writing a book about using travel as a tool for emotional recovery. But the most meaningful change was in my relationship with my family. We had all started attending family therapy sessions with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in family systems who helped us understand the patterns of communication and conflict that had led to my exclusion and the subsequent crisis. Through therapy, we discovered that my role as family caretaker and problem solver had been both a source of value and a source of resentment. My mother admitted that she had come to depend on my emotional labor and organizational skills while simultaneously taking my contributions for granted. When I began setting boundaries and demanding accountability, it threatened a family system that relied on my willingness to absorb dysfunction without complaint. Chloe learned that her fear of conflict had led her to avoid difficult conversations until problems became crises, and that excluding me had been an attempt to manage her own anxiety rather than address underlying family issues. She also acknowledged that competing with me for parental approval had damaged our sister relationship in ways that went far deeper than wedding planning disagreements. For my part, I had to confront my own patterns of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance that had allowed dysfunctional family dynamics to persist for years before exploding during my divorce. Learning to express my needs clearly and consistently, rather than building up resentment until I reached a breaking point, became an ongoing practice that improved all of my relationships. The ring that had caused so much pain during the wedding conflict now served as a reminder of the healing journey we had undertaken together. I wore it not as a symbol of family obligation, but as a representation of my grandmother's independence and strength qualities that had helped me navigate crisis and emerge with clearer boundaries and deeper self-awareness. Chloe and David's marriage had become stronger through the crucible of their wedding crisis, teaching them that they could handle unexpected challenges by working together rather than trying to control every variable. They had also learned that excluding people they loved in an attempt to avoid problems usually created bigger problems than the ones they were trying to prevent. My relationship with my mother evolved from one based on obligation and guilt to one built on mutual respect and clear communication. We established regular coffee dates where we could discuss family issues before they became explosive, and she began asking for my opinion on decisions, rather than simply expecting me to implement solutions to problems I hadn't helped create. The most unexpected development was my friendship with Carson, the Iceland tour guide, who had become a long-distance confidant and eventually a romantic interest. His experience with family rejection and healing had given him insights that helped me navigate my own journey, and his commitment to building a life based on authentic values rather than external approval aligned perfectly with the person I was becoming. We had plans for me to visit him in Iceland again in the fall, this time, not as an escape from family conflict, but as a celebration of personal growth and new possibilities. The country that had provided refuge during my darkest period was now associated with joy and adventure rather than pain and revenge. The social media following I had built during my Iceland crisis had evolved into a platform for sharing resources about family healing, solo travel, and life after divorce. Instead of performing independence for an audience, I found myself genuinely helping other people navigate similar challenges and transitions. One of my most popular posts was a reflection on the difference between healthy boundaries and punitive isolation. Protecting yourself from mistreatment doesn't require permanent estrangement from people who are capable of growth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone a chance to prove they can do better while maintaining the boundaries that keep you safe during that process. The post had generated hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of family conflict and reconciliation, creating a community of support that extended far beyond my personal experience. As I looked out my office window at the Arizona mountains that had seemed so familiar and confining just months earlier, I realized that the greatest gift of my Iceland journey hadn't been the beautiful photos or the viral social media success. It had been the clarity to understand that healing sometimes requires us to leave familiar places and patterns in order to see them from a new perspective. The wedding crisis that had initially felt like cosmic justice or karmic revenge had actually been an opportunity for everyone in my family to practice being better versions of ourselves under pressure. Instead of excluding problems or people to maintain artificial peace, we had learned to face difficulties together and emerge stronger on the other side. My story had become one that I was proud to share not as a victim narrative or a revenge fantasy, but as an example of how relationships could be rebuilt on foundations of honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. The family that had legally threatened me for expressing my emotions now actively sought my input on important decisions and celebrated my successes without reservation. The final lesson I carried from that transformative period was that sometimes the thing that looks like the end of a story is actually the beginning of a better chapter. Being excluded from Chloe's original wedding had felt like the ultimate rejection, but it had led me to Iceland, to career opportunities I never would have discovered, to personal growth I never would have achieved, and ultimately to family relationships that were healthier and more authentic than anything we had built on previous foundations. Iceland had taught me that some of the most beautiful places in the world are created by volcanic activity that initially appears destructive, and that sometimes the most spectacular growth happens after everything you thought you knew gets completely disrupted. As I prepared to close my laptop and head home for Sunday dinner at my mother's house, where my presence was now welcomed and valued rather than tolerated or managed, I felt grateful for every painful step of the journey that had brought me to this place of peace and possibility. The woman who had boarded a plane to Iceland 6 months ago in anger and desperation was still part of me, but she had been joined by someone stronger, clearer, and more capable of creating the life and relationship she actually wanted, rather than simply reacting to disappointment and rejection. That transformation was worth celebrating, and I knew that whatever adventures lay ahead, I was now equipped to navigate them with integrity, courage, and the kind of boundaries that protected love rather than preventing it. I hope my story encourages you to think about the relationships in your own life. Have you ever had to choose between standing up for yourself and maintaining family peace? How did you handle it? And what would you do differently if faced with a similar situation today? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to my channel for more stories about family healing and personal growth, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about second chances and the courage to choose compassion over conflict. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and may you always have the strength to choose the relationships and experiences that help you become the person you're meant to be.